Hello, everybody. I feel like I'm talking into the internet, the cyberspace, but it's really great to see so many of you joining us this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are in the world. I hope you can all hear me okay. I'm going to introduce the event. Karen, our director at BOM, will still be letting people in via the waiting room. So people will still be joining. So if you've got a gallery view, they will be moving around quite a lot. But we're going to crack on because it's 3:10 now. So yeah, thanks for coming. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Louise Latter, and I am the curator at BOM, Birmingham Open Media. We are an arts organisation working at the intersection of science and technology. We're currently working remotely, but we do have a venue in Birmingham City Centre in the UK. And to find out more about our artistic programmes, the engagement work that we produce, our fellowship and our international collaborations, please go to BOM, which is bom.org.uk. We currently have a special collection of curated digital art games and activities aimed at children, but suitable for all, called Doodle, which you can find on our website as well. We're really excited about that. So please share that far and wide with everybody that you know. If you're tweeting or you're on the gram and you are going to put something on about this, then please tag us at BOM Lab and or follow us as well. So I hope you can all hear me. Can I get some recognition in the chat box that I am actually communicating with people? Because I feel like I am just, yay, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Just felt like I was talking into a vacuum there. Thank you. Oh, that's quite a good response. Thanks, everyone. So yes, we've been running Art and Tech Social in various forms for the past few years. And we're delighted to be working with Eyebeam on this. They're an amazing organisation, if you don't know, based in New York City. So big up and big thanks to Eyebeam, who have co-curated this short series with us, and we hope to work with them further. So we have another event after this on the 10th of June, which is with Bassem Saad. And we are also curating another event for July, which is specifically about bioart and biophobia, with one of our BOM Fellow alumni who is here, Laurie. So we're really excited about that as well, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Just to let you know that this is being recorded, so I can't see any faces anyway, but if you've got your camera on and you would rather not have that on the film, then please stop your camera now, because we will be uploading it to YouTube. So what else do I need to say? So yeah, on to today's session, I guess. So LaJuné McMillian, who is our star today, was a resident at Eyebeam in 2019, which was their residency cohort of Access. And LaJuné will be talking about their work. And so I don't want to say too much, but we were particularly attracted to the work that LaJuné was doing around creating a more diverse library and archive of Black culture and representation in XR. And we're really lucky today to also have LaJuné in conversation with local star Amahra Spence from MAIA Creatives. So MAIA Creatives is a dynamic and important cog in the cultural scene of Birmingham. Amahra has long been a friend and colleague of BOM, and she is co-founder and creative director of MAIA Creatives. MAIA is an artist-led platform for creative practice, social change and critical thinking. And please check them out at maiagroup.co. So that's MAIA group.co. MAIA have many events coming up. Including a workshop with Black Ballads with Jendela Benson, and some artist roundtable discussions as well. And they've also been tirelessly fundraising for a West Midlands Artist Emergency Fund. So if you can support that, please go to the project page on maiagroup.co. So before we get started, a bit of event housekeeping. Please keep your mics muted during the session, during LaJuné's presentation, And afterwards, as in our event before, please use the chat, talk to each other, leave comments and ask questions. The conversation will be opened up afterwards. So we hope to really bring about some fantastic conversation and discussion. You can use the chat option on the bottom of your toolbar there. So yeah, so enjoy basically. And I'd like to welcome Amahra and LaJuné.
Hey.
Hello.
Nice to meet you in this.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Thank you, Louise. And honestly, please rewrite my bio because you said some things that I couldn't have said myself.
Oh, I thought I'd said it wrong. I thought that's what that meant. I was like, oh no.
Thank you so much. And LaJuné, it's a pleasure to speak with you. Because when BOM asked me to do this and I had a brief look at some of your work, I was like, yo, okay, let's go. So just thank you so much for being here. If anyone has just joined the chat and didn't see, if you hover over your name, there's a blue box, 3 dots in there. If you can click it, rename, and just add your that would be really helpful. But yeah, I mean, how are you feeling today, LaJuné?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm excited to be in conversation with you, and to be I guess to be here in this digital space. So, yeah, I'm excited to sort of hear your thoughts, and also talk more about what it means to sort of create digital spaces with folks like us in mind, and our communities in mind. Yeah, and just sort of I guess trade thoughts and stuff. So yeah, yeah.
And so, do you want to share a bit about some of your work first, and then we'll get into it?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll just start with sharing my screen and my slides. Okay. Bloop. Oh. You're seeing all of my slides now. Okay, present. Yeah, so I'll just start by talking a little bit about the project that I'm here to share with you today. And the project's title is the Black Movement Project. And first I'll start by introducing a little bit about my work. So I am a new media artist and a creative technologist who's been working sort of at the intersections of performance and installation art. I've been showing my work for about now 5 years, working with dancers, collaborating with other artists and folks, creating virtual reality experiences and installations and performances. I started this work as a part of my schooling at NYU. And yeah, so while I sort of was during the middle of my art career, I sort of realized that access to all of these digital spaces was really hard, especially when it came to access to tools and spaces where I felt comfortable enough to create the work that I wanted to. And so that starts my journey with creating the Black Movement Project. And it started as an online database of Black motion capture and Black character-based models. And essentially, I started here, and this is where I actually started my residency at Eyebeam with this idea as a way to begin creating spaces and tools where we are allowing ourselves to create more diverse extended reality projects and installations. But I realized definitely early on in creating this project that there were a lot of different problems that were problems and loopholes and intersections that I sort of had to address too. And one of them being the entire the Fortnite fiasco. And Fortnite is a video game that's created by Epic Games. And essentially what happened was there were all of these culturally significant dances one of them being the Millie Rock, the Carlton dance, and essentially all of these dances were taken and placed on the market and applied to all of these different characters. So when you play the game, you are able to spend $10 to buy these dances for your characters that you make in the game. And this like opened my eyes to the problem of cultural appropriation, specifically in digital spaces. I think that when we normally talk about cultural appropriation, it's normally not necessarily in this way. And I realized that if I had just continued on my, if I had just continued as it being a motion capture library, then that opened the window for a lot of dangerous things to occur. And then what's also really interesting is that very recently, Rick Astley, like his dance, his Never Gonna Rick rolling dance got imported into the game. And what's sort of funny about this entire thing here is that, you know, you sort of see that his dance is like his Rick rolling dance sort of gets its like attributions, and that it's also connected to Rick, whereas the other dances aren't. So with, like, for instance, with the Millie Rock, those names for those dances are not attributed to like the actual dances themselves. So essentially they like erase the naming from each dance. So a lot of kids are playing these games thinking that they're just Fortnite dances without knowing the like histories and backgrounds of those dances as well. And then we have motion capture libraries that are already available online. However, these libraries are actually free to use. This one is Mixamo, which is a great library if you're interested in learning how to characterize and animate characters for your games and projects. However, one of the problems with this library is that there are a lot of dances that are not accurately attributed to what the dances actually are. So what you're looking at now is this sort of dance that they're calling hip hop dancing, which isn't hip hop dancing. So, and then there are a lot of other dances that are in there as well. They have like fake samba dancing. Just like, it's just like this sort of like lack of care for the movements that are in that space. But then on another level of sort of like a problematic of how these spaces can be problematic is that a lot of these tools don't tell you exactly where the movements are coming from. So on the left here, you see like all of these movements, but you don't know the origins of those movements. You don't know who is doing those motion capture movements. You don't know their stories, or even necessarily like where they did the motion capture at. And I feel like when you're making projects, especially projects that have to do with some sort of like I guess like cultural, with the cultural lens, through a cultural lens, you have to sort of be able to attribute that and know like where those movements are coming from and who they are coming from, because it's important. And so, yeah, representation isn't enough. And I think that in the beginning, when I first started this project, it was all about just representation in digital tools. But if it just had stayed there, it wouldn't necessarily be it wouldn't do the work justice, and it wouldn't like give justice to the movements that are being done by folks in different communities, as well as to our history and to our futures and ourselves right now. And yeah, so that brings me to like some questions that have been sort of like popping up. And one of them is, how do we combat the exploitation, erasure, and dilution of Black culture? And how do we build spaces where our stories are safe, understood, and celebrated? And basically, I think with both of those examples, with Mixamo, the motion capture library, and with Fortnite, we see sort of this, we see like this exploitation and erasure and dilution of Black culture. And so like, what does it mean to build a space outside of that, that navigates digital spaces in a different way? So that's sort of where this project transformed into a library for activists, performers, and artists to not only create extended reality projects, but a space to research how and why we move, and an archive of our existence. And this project is inspired by Katherine Dunham's movement library. And Katherine Dunham was an African-American dancer, choreographer, author, educator, and anthropologist. And basically, she traveled throughout the West Indies in the 1930s, taking videos and writing about different cultures and archiving how they move. And through all of that work that she did, she was able to create performances, and also she created her own technique, which transformed the world of modern dance. And so, sort of using that idea, this library is a space where we are also creating different storytelling tools, as well as building community through performances, workshops, conversations, and tool making. Yeah, and so the first major part of this project that I started to work on was a performance. And I worked with two dancers, Nala Duma, who is also a sound producer, as well as a dancer, and Ronaldo Maurice, who is a dancer for Alvin Ailey. And I began to have conversations with them to learn more about their movement practices and movement journeys. And through learning about them, I was able to create these 3D spaces, as well as embed characters of themselves, to create this immersive performance where audience members would come and learn about the dancers as they were moving. So they were performing to their movement journeys, because we put those interviews into the soundscapes. And to do this, we use the perception neuron suit in Unreal Engine. So what's really funny about this is that I'm actually using the same tools as Fortnite. So Fortnite is built using Unreal Engine, and I'm using it to sort of create these performances. So yeah, and basically they are wearing these suits that I am able to take the motion data from, and basically get that data over Wi-Fi, imported into Unreal in real time. So all of the characters are moving based off of the movements of the dancers. Yeah, so here's a video of that night of the first performance. Let's see.
I produce, write music, and I kind of blend experimental kind of blend. So yeah, Luda, very black, black music, black artists. I started when I was a child. Just skip us, very
Yeah, so and then from there, I've been basically translating this real-time performance into a virtual one, so a virtual reality experience where a user can put on a headset and be more immersed, fully immersed in the stories. And here's just a video from that. We'll watch just like a part of it.
I produce, write, perform my own music. R&B, pop music through an experimental the root of my art is very black music, black art. My whole family's side. I was only one born in the United States. That all speaks. That's another thing. I think I was 10 years. My dad was more active. And then the winner came.
Yeah, but I can share that with y'all if you're interested in seeing like a longer version. But yeah, and then that sort of brings me into the other events that I've been hosting, and one of them is a workshop series called Understanding, Transforming, and Preserving Movement in Digital Spaces, which is a workshop that's open to people of color to learn about extended reality tools in relationship to race, gender, and culture. And with this, basically, we're exploring issues of cultural representation and exploitation through readings, discussions, and as well as connecting that through an introduction to motion capture, rigging, and 3D environments. And yeah, I've been basically touring this workshop at Eyebeam, Afrotectopia, Pioneer Works, Barbarian Group, Barnard College, and Point of View for PBS. And basically, this is like an example of like one of the tools that we use, and just sort of showing like how a lot of these tools are problematic. Like you can sort of see that there are all of these weird sliders that are seen in this tool. It's called FaceGen, and basically like you upload your pictures of yourself, and then it compiles a face, and it's actually pretty like good for creating a face of yourself. But when you sort of dive a little bit more into the tool, you start to see like where the problems arise, like these weird sliders that they have: the African, East Asian, South Asian, and European. And as you can see, like when you move those sliders, you can see like how the software engineers that are behind this project attribute different like these different sliders to masculinity and femininity, as well as different shapes. So yeah, it's weird because you don't know where exactly they got this like these ideas, and also because you know, you can't just reduce entire like continents and like just entire just uh like just yeah, you just can't reduce all of these things to just sliders. So yeah, we talk about that, we have conversations about that, and also this is just one tool, but it's seen in other tools as well. But yeah, like basically more questions. How do we ethically digitize Black movement? How do we protect the data that's collected? And how can it better serve and celebrate the community? How can we effectively challenge digital tools that don't share these values and gain control and ownership over our collective future? And that brings me to the last thing, which is the conversations, which we're having here today, which is great. So, but yeah, basically it's bringing together Black leaders in different fields from different perspectives to dive into these questions with the community. And yeah, each conversation is recorded and archived. And so yeah, this has been really like cool. And so yeah, that brings me to my last slide, which is that this is a movement. And it's a movement that celebrates our history, our culture, and our lives. And it's a movement that serves our community to learn and grow as society evolves. And it holds us accountable to be able to do things in the right way. So yeah, that's about it for my share or slides. And I guess we can get into questions now. Great.
Don't get me started. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, you know, I've got loads of questions and I'm gonna get like thrown into this, but guys, please share your thoughts and comments and questions in the group chat, and I'll try and like feed them into the conversation as we go, and then we'll have a bit of a Q&A towards the end of this session. But I think it's so interesting to be thinking about space, to be thinking about movement in the time that we're in right now, to be thinking about it in the context of COVID-19, and particularly to be thinking about Black bodies in space and movement in this time where I know this has been the same in the US, it's the same in the UK, where we're seeing the disproportionality of Black bodies and brown and Indigenous lives that are affected by COVID-19. I wonder if you can share some initial reflections on what's happening where you are right now.
Yeah, so I live in Brooklyn, but right now I'm in Maryland with my mom. So like at the beginning of this entire situation, I decided to come to Maryland to be with family because I don't necessarily like have like so much family in New York. So I think it was really important for me to be like somewhere safe. I think that in terms of movement, I've been thinking a lot about restriction of movement, and also sort of how like in a lot of communities, that this idea, I've been thinking a lot about like social distancing and how in certain communities social distancing sort of isn't something that like is achievable because everyone sort of like lives on top of each other and like so close and so next to one another. So yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that. And I've also been thinking about like how I can sort of continue thinking about building out this space in a way that's accessible to people. So yeah, I've been like, I have some workshops that I've been teaching outside of this project, and just knowing that some of the students that I am serving don't have like full access to computers or even laptops, and basically they're working right now off of iPads and phones to sort of continue their education. That's been something that I've been thinking a lot about as well, especially because like those particular students are like in Black and brown communities. And so what does it mean to have like access to technology right now? And what does that even mean to have access to information about like what's going on? So yeah, I think like that's been like the main like areas that I've been thinking about in relation to this. How about for you?
Oh boy. I'm really I've been really inspired by a lot of movement work that's been happening in the US, and more so I think it's really interesting the point that you raised about you know, where does information come from, who has access to it, how, you know, what are the sources of that. And it's been really interesting to kind of see in the last few months, like more information, particularly in a Black British context, that is pertaining to some of the challenges. And of course, we know, we feel it in our bodies, we experience it all the time, that the impacts that we're seeing as a direct result of COVID-19 would have been there. They were there long before the pandemic hit. They will be there long after. So to kind of see almost like this public recognition of, like, you know, like, oh, wait a minute, this is a real challenge for so many people. It's been really interesting, but also difficult to kind of reconcile with that. But yeah, I'm really interested in to kind of go back a little bit, actually, in your own journey, because like I would love to know your origin story. Like, how did you get here? Like, I must admit, I did not see any or many Black bodies working in or with technology when I was growing up, and you're out here doing stuff with extended reality and motion capture this, and I'm kind of like, you know, what's your story?
Yeah, so I guess like I'll sort of mix it in with my sort of movement journey too, because I feel like I was always just doing stuff that like that's just like very random. So I grew up figure skating, and yeah, so I just wanted to become like a figure skater at one point. And so um I guess like that was my first like introduction to like being the only Black person in a space. And so I guess like for me, learning how to navigate that and understand what it meant to be like in that world sort of, I guess, influenced my other my other journeys like within other spaces too. So in high school, when I quit, I ended up getting a lot more into coding, and I wanted to become an engineer. And so I ended up like going to when I first started going to Tandon, an engine like well, it was called Polytech at the time. I originally went there for mechanical engineering, and then I realized like in the first semester that I didn't want to be a mechanical engineer. However, that I wanted to keep building and making things. So I decided to sort of just look at the other programs that were offered. And I found digital media, which was sort of like, it was really interesting to me, but it was also very stressful because in that program we were learning about so many different tools. And I thought, or like I previously sort of had ingrained that, you know, you go to college to learn one thing, and then you sort of like become really good at that thing, and then you get a job for it. So to sort of just like get like all these tools thrown at me was very overwhelming at first. But throughout that journey, I began to make art to sort of like, I guess, to sort of like understand like my relationship to that space. And so that's how all of this sort of started. And then I realized that I could connect it to my upbringing, and also it inspired me to sort of like take a step back too, because I realized I had so much unlearning to do that I just sort of had embedded and ingrained like within me from like all of these experiences that I realized I didn't process. So I started to sort of like think about how to process that. And I think that for me, uh I think that one of the things I could have done was just say, oh, like, I don't want to deal with like these digital tools in these spaces because I don't see anyone like me here and it's overwhelming. But I decided to sort of like take a different approach and dive more into it and sort of lean in, because I like technology. However, like, I also see how it affects my life and the lives of people who look like me. in negative ways. So it's like, how do I understand that more? And so I guess like that's, and then also like, how do I like sort of like undo like these sort of like inner like constructs that I've like built in my mind about these spaces and about like who gets to be in these spaces, and also like how to even like remix or see these spaces in a different way. Yeah, I think I think that's about it.
And it's something to, you know, to be able to, like, you build up this level of what we see as knowledge at the time, or whatever, that we then have to go and unlearn. But like you say, you know, you were in this space when you were figure skating, however young you were at that time, you were in these environments, and the things that you were being accustomed to and acclimatized to, and the things that were being sort of absorbed into your body, into your memory, to navigate that. And we know, like so many young Black people, that this is the truth of their experience. To then translate this into I really liked what you said. I got like 6 pages of notes from what you said. I was just like going and going. But when you were talking about the workshop series that you kind of developed as part of this project, and that you were kind of like combining, there is this need and this space to say, people of color have the right, have the liberty, should have the agency to learn, you know, about coding, to learn about motion capture and rigging and all of these things. But alongside that, we need the space to be thinking critically, and it, you know, it's not just enough to learn the tools, but also how do these tools apply in the world? Like, how do you have agency in that space? How do you explore issues of exploitation? I'm just like, like, how do we design learning environments that can hold that duality? Here are the skills, but also here's the context, and here's the maybe rougher underbelly, that actually the two need to be hand in hand.
Yeah, exactly. And even like alongside of that, like I also think about all of the ways, like, so I feel like up until like just previously, like I've always thought about all of the ways that I've had to sort of reject myself to like fit into a lot of these spaces, and like what does it mean to like fully like be in spaces, like to bring your whole self to a space. I think that with these workshops, like sort of like what I want to say, like especially to people of color, like sort of navigating these spaces, is that like, you know, there are levels to like the accessibility problem that go way beyond just being able to afford a lot of this equipment. It's like when you're there, like what are the other systems that are like placed, and barriers that are placed there that sort of keep you from navigating that space as well too. Yeah.
And I think that ties in really nice with Louise's question just about the accessibility of VR in particular. Obviously, we know it can be accessible, and in a multitude of ways. As a user, you become very vulnerable. How do you feel about VR in that context?
So with VR and I guess like all of these like new ways to like with all of these different like extended reality tools, like with augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, all these terms, I feel like with the layers, like there are different ways to approach like how to build a extended reality experience. Like there's like a web VR movement that's sort of out there right now, where like you can learn how to code, but also like in the context of creating virtual reality experiences that are more, I guess, like physically, like they're more like accessible, because you can go online and you can view them, and you don't necessarily have to have a headset to view those or experience those experiences. You can sort of like click around with your mouse or like your mouse pad to sort of like move in and out of the screen. But like in terms of like the other part of that question, I feel like it really depends on and I've been thinking about this a lot too, like who the audience is in VR, and who people are necessarily making for and building for with VR experiences. I feel like right now, in the current climate of people who are creating virtual reality experiences, there is this audience. The audience is for a lot of these experiences. The audience is a rich white male. And so that that person can give you money to continue creating this experience. And with that said, it really changes like the landscape of what the stories are. And even when they end up being like even when I do see like a virtual reality experience, like right now, a lot of them, even when they are about different cultures, it mainly takes on this this like exploitative like experience where you're not necessarily like what's the word? Like you're not necessarily like in the space. You can tell that like this space isn't for like the culture that is just like exploited from, like, but it's for someone else to sort of like take on that experience so that maybe that experience might get more money and recognition. And so like I think for me, and I've talked to my students about this too, like what does it mean to really build experiences for other people and for a different audience, and not for this assumed audience for whoever can give you the funding to keep creating experiences. And if you begin to truly do that, like what does that mean for your art practice? Like how do you sustain yourself and build a future in that? And also, like, I was reading this, so this is a little tangent, but but there was this article along with this like study that has been done. So there's this sort of like problematic like movement also growing like within VR, where there's this like article and studies saying that if a person embodies another person of a different race, then they will become less racist. And yeah, so there are some people out there creating these like virtual reality experiences where you're now a Black person, and like you can now experience the world as a Black person. And in this particular study, basically what they did is they had people put on headsets and like experience the world as a different race, and then afterwards they gave them this survey to it's not a survey, it's this test. It's like this racial bias test. And basically like the people, they scored like higher or something, like they scored higher or lower, so they were less racist afterwards. But then when you start to like look at the test itself that they're using and that they're basing this off of, like you see that there are like problems embedded within that test, because I think it's based off of like whether you click a picture like during a certain time or whatever. And I think that, so like there's a few people who are just like, if I create these experiences, like they'll be able to understand the Black experience more. And I just feel like that's just so, I feel like especially now it's like really just played out. Like I no longer want to see like projects being done to like for this purpose. Like, you know, if you want to do the work of undoing like, you know, racial bias, like then do that. Don't go through different barriers of like doing all these experiences to try to say, oh, you know, like I'm less racist now. Like actually do the work, put the work in, and do the work, which is not easy. It's hard, you know, it's very difficult, you know, to do that work. And but you're not going to get anywhere just like looking at different VR experiences. So Yeah.
And there's something about this like compulsion to reduce like, you know, massively complex, long-standing histories and experiences into like really simple solutions, like, oh yeah, you know, like instantly, because if we apply the technology to reduce racism, as though racism isn't this really complex, you know, system of mess. It's I find it fascinating. I know you talked a bit about like you call it the Fortnite fiasco, and I found that really interesting, thinking about actually who holds the value in what's created, and who profits from those things, and who profits off Black culture. I was looking at just what's been happening with Jalea and the renegade dance, for example, that went viral online, kind of at the beginning of sort of the lockdown period for lots of us. But it was basically this 14-year-old young Black girl who created this dance. It basically went viral, but she was totally erased from the narrative until Black Twitter went ham for her, and then suddenly now she's like on Ellen or whatever, because Ellen is apparently the metric for this is how we acknowledge and recognize people. But you know, when you're talking here a little bit about cultural appropriation in digital realms, and you said something about representation not being enough. I can't big that statement up enough. I think there's a lot of I'm going to come to Alessandro's question in a second about institutional systems and change, but there seems to be like this really like shallow version of, if we just have more representation, then that is the work. There's this obsessive need to like simplify, and for all of the reasons that people would say representation is enough, when really what we're talking about is a deeper form of justice. It's a deeper form of social equity that comes back to this idea about agency, autonomy, ownership, you know, who extracts, who holds on to value, how is value created and acknowledged. And that's something that we're kind of thinking about in our work at MAIA, particularly in physical space, in relation to physical space, where we know a lot of the cultural agitators of a place are usually the ones most disconnected from the resources needed to make change happen in that place. And how easily it is for property developers, for example, to extract the value of creators and of that energy. So it's really interesting to see you kind of talk about these parallels in digital space. I just wonder if you could expand on that a bit more, the idea about representation not being enough.
Yeah, I think that when it comes especially to representation, like we were just talking about, like how there are so few Black people like in this space to begin with, and I guess like when I first like in terms of this project, like when I first like was approaching it, it was in this like, oh, like if we just have more representation like in these digital tools, if we just have motion capture data like from like Black dances, Black cultural spaces, then more Black people will be able to like make like projects and more diverse projects. But then it's sort of just like, I feel like just staying there would have opened this whole door of like, well, who actually has access to this space? Because like when you look at the people who are looking for motion capture libraries, who are looking for character-based model libraries, for the most part, like it's not the community that I want to serve. It's not the people that I actually want to use this tool in this space. And so with that said, I think that, and also even now, I feel like when it, in terms of like who is asking me like where the data is, like it's mostly white people. They're like, well, where can I see this? Where can I see this like data now? Like, where can I like, you know, access this space? You know, how can I use this for my artificial intelligence algorithms? And I'm like, oh no, like I don't know. I'm like, no, like this is not like, and these are like literal, like I've gotten DMs from people asking me for access to this space that I feel is just like, that like it scares me. And so like I think that like with representation isn't enough, like without addressing the power structures that are sort of like embedded within like these sort of digital spaces, like even with like the whole like like how a lot of like companies now have like new like diversity initiatives, like how do we get more like Black people and brown people to work here, but we're not actually going to change. We're gonna like yeah, we just want them to be in our mess. Like, we don't actually
environment.
Yeah. We're not going to change anything about this environment. We're not going to change, like, we're not going to actually do the work that is needed to make this space safe for Black and brown people. We're just going to bring them in, and when they like show that, you know, they're not about it and that they want to ruffle some feathers, then we're just going to fire them and then hire someone who will actually deal with like all of our bullshit. So yeah. Yeah, so
even that question of like, where is safe to be Black? Like, where is safe to be Black in real life, in digital realms? Like, Ben's asked a really interesting question as well, which maybe you can answer this in two parts. Like, where is safe to be Black, but also how do you feel about people being reduced to data points in motion capture?
Exactly.
Essentially,
yeah,
the visual and capturing the movement. Do you find that people retain their identity despite this?
exactly. Yeah, I feel like yeah, like the data question especially, I feel like that is something that I've really been exploring and trying to understand, because at the end of the day, like the movements themselves like hold way more data than just the visuals that you see. Like I think that even when it comes to just videos of us dancing, it's not just like the movements that we're doing, it's not just the rhythms that we're like showing, like we are sharing like for me Black movement, and I guess like this also like brings me to like what is technology, like, you know, like what is technology, right? For me, movement is a technology. You know, it's not a digital like technology, but it is in itself a technology. It's a way for us to communicate with one another. And in terms of Black movement, you know, we use Black movement to communicate, to share community, to build these sorts of spaces where we can be safe, right? And I think that even in terms to your last question, one of the biggest like questions that I've really been trying to ponder on is who owns Black movement? And the answer is nobody owns Black movement, you know, because it's not something that can be owned. And so what is it that they are, like, what is it that Fortnite or all of these other, like, what is it that appropriators, like what is it that they're sharing that they're like being compensated off of? And should we as like as a Black community, should we use those same systems to be compensated for our work? And if we are doing that, like we also have to see like what we can do outside of that, you know, because that model is not enough. Just being fiscally like paid for our movements, like that right there for me, like as a model, like that's reductive. Like that's not something that is really giving us the justice that we need. Like we need more than that. So like I've been trying to understand like what Black movement is, like what defines Black movement, what types of Black movement are there, and how do we, and in asking the question who owns Black movement, how do we sort of break down these like capitalist structures that try to pigeonhole Black movement as sets of data points that can be exploited in the first place. Yeah.
There's something about this idea as well of like you touched on it beforehand about as artists, as makers, Often what we produce is so many things at one time. Like, it is an art form, it is a storytelling tool, it is a form of communication, it is its own technology. And the hybridity of all of those things, and giving space to all of those things, it just feels like it's such an intrinsic part of, you know, who we are and how we make. And I've been thinking about this in my own practice of like, what are the stories I want to tell, or what are the things that I want to amplify, and how is justice and equity like a thread through all of those things, and what am I giving my energy to, and what's taking from my energy, and all of those questions. We've been on this journey of building physical infrastructure that can actually look at I guess what social equity would look like in physical form, and kind of like using models that have I gone a bit quiet? Using models that that we know work but have been sort of like extracted from many sources, right? So we have like property developers who are like, hey, artists, come in, do your cool thing, make the cool stuff happen, and then piss off after 5 years. Thank you very much for your work and for justifying the rent hikes and all that kind of stuff. Or, you know, in the hood, like, here's some subsidized or like rundown houses that we've left to neglect. Come in, people, make it cool, and then bugger off and you know, go elsewhere. And this constant, like, that form of movement, we were like, how do we establish ourselves in our own communities? How do we own the infrastructure? How do we own the land, the technology? And how do we build things that are much more regenerative from source, right? So like, from its very origin, how do you have like a community owned asset that can't be shaken, you know, that is super bold and super redistributive in all of those ways? And it's been a journey in like physical space, but I think there's something about technology where it's almost like the elements to which you're opened up to are like, you know, just how easily data can be taken and co-opted, or how easily somebody else's intentions can totally 360 your whole, you know, it's really quite incredible. I think there's some, Alessandro, before he left, he asked, how do you design the learning environments? How do we go about changing institutional systems, and what can be done outside of institutions in an informal exchange of skills and learning? I was thinking about that in terms of even like, so we're building this hotel as we've been on this journey to build this hotel that kind of like follows all of the redistributive and regenerative approach we were talking about. We've now entered into this like, okay, we're going to build housing as well in our community, and we're just going to like make sure that it's a community owned asset. And we've been thinking like, how do we share the knowledge as we're going through this thing? So like, people in the hood that we're in can also know that it's perfectly feasible for them to create something like this, or totally different, or utopian, or at least shoot for that. And if it's not that, then, you know, it will hopefully be a bit better. Like, all of those things. How do you create the learning environment so all of this knowledge is circular?
I think like that's something I definitely have to like keep. I think like that's like a growing question, but I think like that's sort of why I've been interested with the idea of libraries, like and like this sort of like rebuilding of new libraries, and understanding a remodeling of libraries, of like revisioning like what a library can do, and the type of work that like it can sort of bring. Because I feel like with the library, like there's so many things that can happen there. Like people go to the library to like, you know, that's just to stop the, like I used to work like at a STEAM program that operated out of the basement of a library in Bed-Stuy, which is like which was like a very like it was very interesting and very sad, because like Bed-Stuy, in especially being like gentrified and gentrification, you see like all of these like new like restaurants like popping up here and there. You see the people who are walking outside of the library not being not representing the people who are using that particular library. So like in that STEAM program, it was open to everyone. Like we weren't necessarily saying like, you know, like this is just for like Black and brown kids, but you know, the students in the population that came to that program were Black and brown children who like needed to like go somewhere like after school, who like may have not eaten lunch, so like that was their opportunity to like have a snack and learn about science and technology. And so like just like with that example and that being posted in a library, like it sort of like shows just like how diverse and how many different like I guess like showing just like how many like different like things can sort of like be hosted like in that space. And so like I think that institutionally, like I've been trying to learn more just about libraries and like the history of libraries, mainly because I just find it very interesting as like this space that's not forcing you to do anything. Like it's not forcing you to read books, but there are so many books. Like it's not forcing you to go on the computer, but like there are computers there for you to use, and then it doesn't even force you to sort of do X, Y, and Z, which I think that like is really important for like more spaces to hold, where we're not necessarily like where we're giving folks the opportunity to like digest the information that's around them, but we're also giving them a space to just be. And I think like that is like institutional wise, like I think like that's like very important to create more spaces like that, and to just like not like force this sort of thing on people, but to sort of like, because people are also going to connect to other things. They'll connect to like different aspects of the space more so than like I think like some people will be more connected to going to the performances or like listening to conversations more so than just going to a workshop, even though they want to go to a workshop. You know, like I think like just giving them the opportunity to sort of like digest this information in different ways, in a variety of ways, and whatever way is more comfortable for their learning, like for how they learn and how they like take up space. I think like that's important. Yeah.
I think in you know, this reimagining what a library could be, and even your shift from saying, okay, this is a tool that I'm using, to this is fundamentally about archiving our experiences and asserting, you know, that we are here now. What do you imagine, like where do you see the Black Movement Project going? Like what's your utopian vision for it? I'm all for utopias.
So currently I am thinking about it, or I'm envisioning this space sort of as a like I've been thinking about this idea of a pop-up library. So like what does it mean to sort of like have this library but then like move it to different areas? Like how can I sort of like pop up like in New York one day, but then pop up in like California, or pop up like, you know, just anywhere in the world, like with this like big robust library full of books and information, but also like these weird performances and conversations and workshops. I think like that's definitely something that I like view for the library itself. I've been thinking a lot about like this sort of anthropology like component too. Like what does it mean for me to sort of like go to like all of these different spaces, and like what does it mean to like I guess like get all of these experiences to place in the library? Like what does that even look like? Like is it more like field work? Like what type of field work is that? Like I guess like this like what does that even look like? I've been thinking about like having a conference like that's more like this conversation, but like on a larger scale. So it'd be like you know, a multi-day experience where we all just sort of sit together and talk about Black movement, but we also like have embodied like experiences too, like through like movement workshops and stuff. So yeah, I think like for me right now, I've just been thinking about like all of the different ways to sort of approach like this project. And approach it more as like a process, more so than just like having it just be like this product that people see, but like as something that they experience. Like, how do you experience, like, what are all of the different ways that you can experience the space in? So yeah, I think like that's, oh, sorry.
Oh, no. I was going to say, what do you think what are some of the considerations that you're having as you sort of envision that future, like particularly around the technology? Like, what are some of the considerations or things that you're having to navigate through as you grow the project?
So I would love for these like workshops and classes to and also just I would love just like for this library to also sort of like work as a sort of like a new way of building different types of tools, like trying to like envision like what that sort of process looks like. So I would love if I could, or if if the project could build a space where people could envision those different tools in those different ways of interacting with new technologies. Like, I would love for that to be something that the library could like sort of create, like, because like that would be like my, like, I guess like my biggest like dream for like new tools and different tools to be like made like as part of this library through like community building and all these things. Yeah, I think like that would be like the dream. Yeah.
If anyone has any questions, we've got about 10, 15 minutes left. So if anyone has any questions that they want to ask or any comments, feel free to take your mic off or drop it in the chat and I'll read them out. But LaJuné, I wanted to ask if there's anything that you wanted to ask anyone in this space, or anything that you wanted to explore as well.
Wow. Let me go to my doc. I think. Oh yeah. I did want to talk about Black movement and also I guess like just the different spheres of Black movement. We did touch on this a little bit, but like Black movement through performance, through activism, through being, like, through all of these different things. Like, there's so many different types. There are so many different ways that we move like throughout the world. And I guess like I just wanted to hear like a bit about that more from you. Like, you know, like how do you feel about like Black movement and like what does it sort of like mean to you? Yeah.
There's something that feels so like rejuvenating actually, and I've noticed in my own work and in my own experience that there's something about collective grief that we turn into this pragmatism, that we turn into like actually like a poetic form of pragmatism. So like when and this kind of spreads across the diaspora, right? So I know that, for example, when Nipsey Hussle passed, who was an LA artist and entrepreneur, and he was killed last year. And when he passed, it felt like there was this sort of like global lament. It felt like a lot of people were in mourning, and we kind of had this. There was a moment in Birmingham where we're kind of asking ourselves, what do we do with this? What do we do with this grief? Like, I can feel, I'm allowed to feel my sadness, like, and this is okay. What next? Like, what do we do after that? When we know inherently we're a pragmatic, soul-driven people. And so a group of us got together and we started a collective called Duende, which is really about how do we take the learnings of like our ancestors around collective organizing, collective finance, and sort of like reimagine what infrastructure, what land, what policy would look like for our generation and beyond. So like I am the granddaughter of someone who came from the Caribbean, came from Jamaica by way of Dominican Republic, got here in 1960, and ended up like shacking up with about 12 million cousins because, you know, shared housing. And they set up, a lot of cultures call it different things, but in the Caribbean, in Jamaica, it's called a partner, which is about, basically it's like a saving system that's built on trust. So like you have a banker in your squad and they hold the money, and they set that up because they couldn't access mainstream banks for all of the institutional racism and everything else that we know about the banking industry. They couldn't access banks, so they set up this system. So we, as Duende in 2019, 2020, we started to ask ourselves, how would we take that concept of trust? How would we take that collective ownership of a system, of a financial system, and expand on that? So we like do all these experiments, right? And we're like, okay, we'll set up a partner, but we want to create like a investment scheme from this thing as well. So then we're like, well, if we set up an investment scheme, what are all the things that we could then be liberated to commit to? Like, what could we support? What could we resource? How could we like develop community land trusts? Which, when I first heard about community land trusts, for example, I thought like it was a thing that, I don't know, came from like England in 1600 and whatever. I didn't know that it was like, yo, African Americans were like, we need to hold on to our shit. Like, I didn't know the origins of community land trusts. And so like understanding like this is our history, like all of the things that we've been inspired by around collectivism, that's our history. Like we have been doing that. We've long been doing that for our own survival. So Black movement for me is about, how do we go from beyond our survival, our immediate survival, into a collective survival that's centered on joy? And I think this joy thing is like, yo, like joy is my number one metric. Joy and health are like, that's what Black movement is for me. Whatever can help us shift towards that, whatever can help us strive towards that, whoever needs to be part of the ecosystem that can get us closer to there, that's it. That's where we at. That's what we're investing in. That's what we give our energy to. But it's really interesting, I think, going back to like ancestral knowledge, you know, the internal things that our spirits know. I'm very Jamaican, so this whole thing of like, if my spirit doesn't take to it, it doesn't take to it. You know, I think that's such an underplayed survival strategy. But really, like, I keep coming back to that thing, and I think that's what Black movement is for me.
Oh, I love that. Yes. That was so beautiful.
I should have wrote it down.
Oh, it's recorded, I think. Yes. Oh, that's beautiful though. Oh my gosh.
It does feel like there is this real like global movement, and I think it's been really hard to think about silver linings and positives in this time of like COVID-19. But the fact of like where digital poverty hasn't affected some people, you know, the fact of communities can suddenly feel so much more proximate, and proximity is where, you know, proximity is really where the change happens. Like, we need to be proximate to each other. I'm such a big fan of Davita Davison, who's the exec director at Detroit Food Lab, and she talks so much about proximity, and like you have to be in with the people. Like, you have to be so close, so connected to your community, that you feel what they feel, that you breathe when they do, that you exhale when they do. And I see that, like, you know, there feels like there's this global proximity that we're slowly getting really in tune with each other. And of course, acknowledging that there are nuances within our experiences. Like, I don't know the ins and outs of what's happening in Bed-Stuy, but I believe you when you say, honey, I'm like, okay, I know I'm with you, you know. We acknowledge our nuances, but still there's this like collective striving. I'm feeling all the love today. Can you tell? Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between Brooklyn and Maryland?
Oh, well, right now I'm in like where, like, there's a lot of space. I don't really like go outside that often unless I have to go to like the grocery store. But yeah, it's very like where my mom lives is like very like suburban, so like there's a lot of just like space. So I just like look out the window and I just see like a road, and like there's not that many people walking around. But in Brooklyn, like before I left, there was so many people walking around, and like and like I talked to my friends who are still in Brooklyn, and it's still a lot of that. So it's just like, oh no, but they but people have to go out, like people have to go to work, like some people still have to go to work, like there's not like really an option to live differently, like outside of like how you've been living, especially like if you have a job that's still operating right now during this time. So I think that especially like in the area that I live in, I think like that is very like rampant. That's very much like the like that's like how it's pretty much operating now. So yeah.
You've got another New Yorker back in Maryland as well. Squad. Black
Cool.
movement. If anyone has got any last minute questions or thoughts, or even just let us know where in the world you are. Oh, you got a Maryland squad.
Like,
Way up the Bronx. What is this New York Maryland exchange? I'm really hoping that, you know, when we get through the sort of immediacy of coronavirus and all its impacts, that we can all meet up at BOM at some point in the near future and have a baby or whatever your drink of choice, and just connect and you know and stay together through all of this. Yes.
Yes. This would
But,
be amazing. Yeah.
We're gonna stay connected regardless. We have to.
Yeah, no, this is amazing. Thank you so much for like talking with me.
Thank you so much
both.
for the project as well. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
That was a joy to listen to you both, like vibing off each other. I'm like, my face hurts from smiling. So thank you. It was amazing. LaJuné, will you share your socials in the chat,
Sure.
please, so people can follow you online or find out more? And is that video that you showed, the beautiful video of the movement, is it public? Is it online?
Yeah, so I put my @ for Instagram and Twitter, it's the same thing, @_LoveLaJa. And then laja.me is my website where all the videos are posted under Black Movement.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It's really amazing, like food for thought. And I think there's a lot of people on here who resonate with what you're saying in like different ways. There's lots of different things that were coming up there. And I hope that in some way we can continue the conversation. So I'll have a think about that. So stay connected.